Welcome back to the People of 1953. If you haven't already, please go watch episode 4 where we talk about Project Artichoke in MK Ultra and a lot of interesting things over there regarding a lot of highly figures like Frank Olson and Jolly West. Today we're going to talk about a really sensitive subject and I would like to get into it. It is the Oklahoma City bombing. But the main thing behind it is, though, there was a lot of people that went beneath the radar. But my main question is, who's Carol Howe? Let's give a quick backstory to Oklahoma City bombing. On 1995, April 19th, Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nicholas detonated a bomb inside of a rental truck parked outside the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building. It ended up killing 168 people and injuring 684. It ended up destroying a third of the building practically. That was pretty much left. Pretty much the whole building was destroyed. And it ended up damaging another 324 buildings as well, 86 cars, and caused $652 million in damage. I would say 168 during cleanup. One of the workers was struck in the head and ended up dying. So it's two different reports. One will say 167 and one will eventually go to 168. McVeigh would later go on and get lethal injection, but there's a lot to the story, but specifically today we're going to focus on more like the planning and the why behind it, not much just more of the what. And it is a sensitive subject. Again, we're going to keep reminding you that, but I really, really think there's a lot of people that got away with it and they need to be held responsible. So specifically, first of all, we're going to get into Carol Howe, but it all relates to where we're about to go with this. So let's talk about the planning. So McVeigh and Nicholas, or Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols, good Lord, met in 1988 at Fort Benning during basic training. Also, McVeigh met Michael Fortier, Fortier, as his roommate, as his Army roommate. The three of them supported survivalism. Yeah, we're going to put it on the screen right here, get you all into it. Didn't know much about it myself until I really started looking into it. They were radicalized by white supremacists and anti-government propaganda. So where do these three soldiers get this ideology from, this white supremacist and anti-government? Well, according to reports, well, actually according to McVeigh himself and other people, it was about the Ruby Ridge FBI standoff in 1992 and how the government handled that, as well as the Waco siege that lasted 51 days with the standoff of the Branch Davidians in 1993. There were some reports that he planned the attack on April 19th, 1995 to coincide with the second anniversary of Waco and the 220th anniversary of the battles of Lexington and Concord during the Revolutionary War. That's one thing to note. So we talk about the Branch Davidians a little bit in the Waco. Why? Well, in March 1993, McVeigh actually visited during the standoff and again at the end of the siege ended. He believed the U.S. government efforts to restrict the rights of private citizens under the Second Amendment. So McVeigh stated that several federal agents were acting like soldiers, thus and attacking a federal building in attack on their own command centers. Those are all his words, quote unquote. So really what he was saying is the government and how the U.S. handled it versus those private citizens and people trying to live on their own, how they handled them, and it was violent death for a lot of them. They didn't stand for that, and that really began the anti-propaganda in their mind. So we're going to fast forward a little bit. We're going to skip the how he got arrested part, really. One thing is to note that the FBI, they got so much evidence. But one key thing was when they raided McVeigh's house was a phone number that led them to a farm where he purchased supplies. But there was also an additional phone number that led them to a town in Oklahoma, believe it or not, and back to an Aryan army, essentially. It's called Elm City. We're going to get into that in a little bit, but keep that in mind and get that in mind. Those two numbers, the farm and the callback to Elm City, would eventually lead to unravel to kind of who is Carol Howe, the ultimate question of this episode. So I mentioned an Aryan army earlier in Elm City. So let's get into that. The ARA is the Aryan American Army, not the American. The Aryan Republican Army, ARA, also dubbed the American Midwest Bandits by the FBI and the law enforcement, was a national terrorist gang. That's what they labeled them. From 1994 to 1996, they robbed 22 banks in the Midwest, and they were spearheaded by Dana Longan, Dannalongun. Longan. We're going to put the picture right here. They basically, who was a member of a neo-Nazism and a white supremacist movement. I don't know why they always label it like that on the documents, but they do. And they were alleged to co-inspire with Timothy McVeigh months before the bombing initially happened. That's a bold claim that this Aryan Republican Army was a part of this such dark thing and knew Timothy McVeigh. But there's actually a lot of evidence that really ties them together. And this might be a 2-part series, but let's try to get it all into a 10-minute episode. So we'll start off with this. Many theorists believe that the ARA fueled robbery money to help fund the bombing as a direct response to the Waco and Ruby Ridge siege. Yes, bold claim. Maybe not make sense in a second, but like I said, let's get into it. So earlier I said they were Midwest bank robbers. Oh, technical difficulties with the lightning. We're gonna keep going though. They already use a strict timekeeper kind of thing. When they robbed banks, they was only in and out in 90 seconds. And they used presidential masks, such as Clinton, Reagan, and Nixon. They also wore jackets that said FBI, a bunch of 3-letter agencies. Won't name too many of them because they're probably watching. But it also comes from the movie Point Break. And so that's where they think that the film, a lot of the inspiration came from. Catherine Bigles, Bigelu, or US. Sorry, sometimes my handwriting's everywhere. The FBI was unaware of the existence of the ARA until one of the members was apprehended. In 1996, the group began to fall apart. Richard Lee Guthrie on January 5th, 1996 was caught in Cincinnati, Ohio after a 2-hour police chase. Yes, 2-hour police chase. And he brought down the whole group. Soon after Guthrie was caught, he would eventually give up one of his counterparts, Logan. 3 days later, on January 18th, 1996, the FBI arrested Logan after a 50-round shootout. Yes, at a safe house near Columbus, Ohio. So before I start naming names that you probably don't know, let me give you the list of all the ARA members. Langone, I don't know why they don't give him a second name. It's literally just Longon, and then it says Guthrie, Michael Williams, and there's a Pressa, BRESCIA, and then Mark Williams Thomas, Sean Kinney, Kevin McCarthy, and Scott Deedford. I'm gonna put the names here and photos of them here. The names are random. And it's Richard Lee Guthrie. My apologies on that. He's considered the leader of the organization. And then Langan and her best friend founded it in 1992, the ARA. So I bet you're wondering, why am I giving all these names and this random information about the ARA? Well, it's actually fun to mention that Michael Williams Bresca, BRESCIA, I have a photo right here, and Richard Lee Guthrie, both resided for a time at Elm City, Oklahoma. Remember I mentioned it earlier. Let's get into that part. Elm City, Oklahoma was a private community made up of followers of Christian pastors. Robert G. Miller, Miller. It's important to remember that. And he was a right-wing extremist and other right-wing extremists. So basically they're all, it's essentially like a cult, but I won't say a cult because they're still existing. It's all allegedly. And so, and other ARA members known to frequent in Elm City. Yes. So it's not a white supremacist town, but pretty much this sector of Oklahoma, or this one part of Oklahoma, I think it's like 300 acres at one point, is theirs. They ran it. It's just all the community. It's a private community made up of Christians and white-wing neo-Nazis, essentially. Okay, so we're starting to tie it in now. We're starting to get there. Work with me. So Elm City Security Director Andre Strassmeir, Strasmeir. We might do a whole episode about him. Could be a possible German informant that got away and went back to Germany, allegedly. He was also known as associate with Timothy McVeigh, which they met at a gun show. The feds discovered on April 5th, 1995, McVeigh made a phone call to Elm City after just 2 weeks prior to the Oklahoma City bombing, calling and needing the place to stay at 3:48 p.m. That was 2 weeks prior to the Oklahoma City bombing. Additionally, 5 women from Tulsa, actually at a nightclub, identified Breska as a man who was paying for McVeigh's drinks. That was on April 8th, 1995, just 3 days after the McVeigh's suspicious phone call. So yes, all well-known members of Elm City, and McVeigh was hanging out with them and needing a place to stay, and they were paying for his drinks. So obviously, there's some type of connection there, especially if you're hanging out 3 days after that suspicious phone call. Plus, the 2 men were known to be frequently coinciding with each other and associates in Kansas. So let's start to actually get into what kind of episode goes into. And this is definitely going to be a 2-part series. I'm just going to put that out there now. There's just so much information and so much speculation behind different things. I feel like we have to do the justice. So I bet you're wondering, how does Carol Howe connect to any of this? Well, and you're probably wondering, who's Carol Howe? Well, to start off, her name was Carol Elizabeth Howe, and she was a former informant for the ATF. Yes, ATF. She became a key figure in the Oklahoma City bombing, in multiple Oklahoma City bombing theories. I'm gonna put theories here because she was tied in, allegedly. She was a right-wing extremist. And she basically whistleblowed on people that there's a bunch of right-wing extremists that wanted to blow up the federal building months before that happened. So me personally, I think the government had a bunch of knowledge on it. They didn't say anything about it. We're going to get into it on this episode, definitely. We're going to kind of get into that now, actually. More about Carol Howe, though. She was adopted by a wealthy family in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Her father was Bob Howe, a former CEO of MAPCO, MAPCO, and it was incorporated in a Tulsa Energy Confederate or something like that. I don't know how to conglomerate. Don't know how to say the word. Anyways, her dad was a billionaire, essentially, like a big time name. Again, it's all alleged. According to Dennis Mahone, Mahon, he was a White Aryan Resistance member. Howe wrote to him in 1993 about her interest in joining the group. She said she became involved in white supremacists after 1994, after she was allegedly beat up by a group of African American men and being injured, and that's the moment she basically became racist, basically, and she called a local hotline operator by Holmes and told her lawyer. But it's important to note that her late husband disputed the counts of this and said that she had jumped off part of the set for a passion play in a Chandler Park. So she basically said that she became racist because she got jumped by a group of African American males, and that's why she called Mahomes a white supremacist hotline and basically tried to join the group. On the contrary, her husband at the time disputed the accounts. He said, no. You were on the set for a passion play in Chandler Park. Take a picture here. And you hurt yourself then. So this all matters. And it's going to matter in about 3 to 4 minutes when we start tying in everything else. Well, the letter worked. The story worked. Whether you believe it or not. In 1994, Mahone took a 24-year-old Howe to Elm City. That's why we were talking about it. While living on a compound for several months, she appeared on German television with Mahone to advocate as means to reach a goal for a racially pure white society. Several episodes. I personally think they were propping her up and kind of making her a figure so they can draw more attention to this place, this city, and get more recruits. I'm like, what makes more sense than you have a woman doing it, her face, however you promote it. I'm not gonna say beautiful, but you can promote beauty more than you can promote violence. You know what I mean? And you can tie the two together. Deception works. That's just how it worked from the beginning of time. So we mentioned earlier a man by the name of Robert Mueller, the founder and the spiritual leader of Elm City. Again, allegedly. Howe stayed there approximately 6 weeks before the Oklahoma City bombing, and she had been She had been sexually abused by Mahone and would promptly flee to her grandpa's ranch in Texas. Yeah. It's important to note in August 1994, Howe filed a restraining order against Mahone, which we're going to kind of speculate around that because he still is around this guy in this area. This would draw attention from the ATF, who were already investigating Mahomes' radical paramilitary group, White Aryan Resistance, which would be known as WAR, for suspicion of federal crimes, federal firearms crimes, and conspiracy laws. Shortly after this, Carol Howe was then employed by the Federal Bureau by ATF as a confidential informant. So she files a restraining order, and that really opens the doors for the ATF to kind of, all right, you know the guy, we're looking into the guy. We're going to try to get him on charges. So we need you to take down WAR. And also tell us everything else that's happening at this city. So from August 1994 to March 1995, Howe served as an ATF informant under the code name C1-183. She was paid $120 a week to monitor the Elm City compound and write monthly reports to ATF handler. This is important to know. The ATF handler, Agent Angie Finley Graham. Again, Agent Angie Finley Graham. So basically, the ATF is paying her $120 a week to snitch. I mean, it's against a white supremacy group, so is it even snitching? Howe would eventually describe the members of Elm City as a ultra-militant white separatist with anti-government beliefs. It's important to note, she doesn't say supremacist, it says separatist. She noted that the community had a Branch Davidian flag and a had sympathy towards David Koresh and how the government treated him. Sorry, my handwriting was a little off. I was like, brands. I was like, this ain't no Nexium. Like, they don't got no brands. We won't get into that. So we talked about the agent earlier. Howe reports that she tried to talk to her handlers prior to April 19th, 1995, and said that the Elm City members, several residents, was actually talking about attack on federal buildings, which included the Alfred P. Murrah federal buildings in Oklahoma City. So Howe is alleging that the federal government had acknowledged that a white supremacist group was going to blow it up, and several members of the Elm City. Remember, Timothy McVeigh frequented in Elm City and was there 3 weeks before the bombing. On the contrary, the agency officials would actually claim that Howe was deactivated because of mental instability. Finley Graham states, remember that's Agent Angie, states that Howe was reinstated in the aftermath of the bombing, but did no informant work after June 1995. So it's basically saying, yeah, okay, well, she wasn't an informant. Oh, no, she wasn't working for us. She wasn't working for us during the time. But after the bombing, she came back to work for us. I don't have a cap on, but. So after the bombing, you're probably like, okay, well, what happened to Carol Howe, or what happened to this group? Well, they reached out to the ATF, reached back out to Howe and told her to go back to Elm City in order to obtain information regarding the connections between the resident and the bombing. So she started on May 1st, 1995, and only actually stayed there for 3 days before the ATF handler told her to report. They probably were like, all right, well, they're catching on to this. You're probably like, how can this woman just disappear and come back at a time that they probably knew, a lot of the Elm City members probably knew, and ARA members knew that the feds was on them. Well, actually, yes. Robert Miller on May 18th, 1995, speculated that Howe was working for the federal government as an informant. So he would later go on to ban her, actually. Howe was a Terry Nichols trial where, she testified against Terry Nichols and said that she saw Timothy McVeigh in Elm City in July 1994, with Andre Carl Strassmeer. And we talked about Andre Strassmeer earlier, and Peter Word. This is important. She identified John Doe number 1 and John Doe number 2 as brothers, Pete and Tony Word, residents of the compound. This is important to know, y'all. Howard said that the ATF showed her videos at a KKK rally, and she pointed out Timothy McVeigh. So clearly, she had some type of knowledge of members working together. But oddly enough, this is kind of where the speculation comes in. Judge Richard P. Masch, Matsch, refused to allow Howe's testimony in the McVeigh trial in the bombing case. A little strange that if she's seen him at this place several times and that the Elm City members were saying that they were going to blow up the building, and 3 weeks before the building blows up, McVeigh was at that place, the math ain't mathing. So if the math ain't mathing, let's start putting 2 to 2 together. Well, sometime after the bombing, Howe would eventually go on underneath the name Freya, Freya, along with the fiance James Dodson Van Hyke, Viefhausak. And they formed a white supremacist group out of Tulsa known as the National Socialist Alliance of Oklahoma. It's important to remind you there's only 2 members, them 2. But they would go on to make a hotline which had recorded various bomb threats, actually, fun fact. Well, on December 13th, 1996, a search warrant was conducted. The FBI bomb expert by the name of Robert Heickman, Heckman, found a pipe bomb and a bunch of lethal ingredients, such as guns. I can't read my own handwriting at this point. Anyways, there's a lot of makeshift weapons and a list of targets of government officials that they were trying to blow up. And then they found like a cap bomb and different stuff like that. Ingredients all to make a bomb. That's what they discovered during the search warrant. So you're probably wondering, okay, this woman that knew all this information and that testified went off scot-free, essentially. You would think. Well, it basically did. But let's not spoil it yet. We're still putting 1 and 1 and 2 together. We're almost there. So Howe had been not charged previously in the connection with the raid, but a hearing for Van Heist, her husband at the time, considered her almost as equally as a threat, according to the prosecutors. So Howe would go on to say that the reason why she set up the hotline was because the federal government at the time had blown her cover, essentially having her on the stand for stuff like that. So this would further her image so she can continue to be informant. So Carol Howe, during her trial, actually explained to the jury that her white supremacist act was all just in furtherance of trying to be an undercover government informant and get information. So the swastika tattoo on the shoulder and the different things like that was all just for the love of the game of spying and being an informant. And all the times she visited and joined and going on TV, German TV and all that, it was all just because just trying to be a better spy. Howe testified that the capped pipe, black powder, and fuses recorded from the house was all things she confiscated as an informant for the ATF. That's a lot to decompress there. I had to take a moment. So Van Heist was convicted of transmitting a bomb by threat, telephone answering machine. His charges are weird, and conspiracy to transmit the threat. He was sentenced 38 months in prison. Conspiring to make a bomb and possessing a destructive device. Howe was not found guilty in a separate trial. So, husband at the time made a whole white supremacist hotline, found bombs, ingredients for a bomb, a list of government conspiracy people, or government people they wanted to kill, and a list of officials, and he got 38 months. And Howe walked away scot-free. Let's just take a second. So I bet you're wondering, where did she go after this? Well, she eventually walked away scot-free. Howe would eventually change her name to Sarah Collins and would eventually die in a house fire. She died in a house fire on January 6, 2025 in Sparta, Tennessee. A possessor of her ashes from the deceased by the name of David Island, Ednlane of Vakovots, some white supremacist group, WOTOSWOLK, made a proclamation of, quote unquote, fitting of a snitch to die entrapped in flames. It's pretty deep. So the possessor of her ashes, whoever got a body basically, which was a member of the group essentially, they basically said, like that's what she deserves. That's what she deserves to die. There's a lot of things and cans that still need to be opened with worms in this, and it's crazy to say that There were several connections to the Oklahoma City bombing that went ignored. Several red flags that were announced before April 19th. That got totally ignored. We can go back to 1971. We can go back to Richard Snell. This is all stuff I'm naming that we're going to talk about in episode 2, but it's been a lot. So Carol Howe was essentially, she knew, allegedly, it's all allegedly, she knew about the Oklahoma City bombing before it even happened. She had warned the ATF several times, through months of reports. She was around all these people in Elm City for years. ARA, war, a bunch of white supremacists. So the real question goes to, how and what did she know that allowed them to walk scot-free and never face any repercussions? Her whole life. Every year the bombing anniversary comes around. Every year. Did she talk to her associates? Did her husband that only got 38 months think about his remorse? Did any of them, the connection to McVeigh? And that they're all weirdly connected to this small town in Oklahoma that magically connects back to Timothy McVeigh in Oklahoma City bombing. Do we blame the ATF? We'll get into that on part 2. It's been a deep episode.